Hi, my name's Mark and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to take you through my experience of making the Halibut Sweater from Caitlin Hunter. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining me for this visit to my most recent sweater project. I'm starting this sweater in Tucson, Arizona. I'm enjoying a beautiful morning here, wearing short sleeves, just enjoying the warmth and a peaceful morning of starting a new project. So I decided to start this project with a provisional cast on. That's a different approach than what the pattern recommends. I've talked about this in other videos, but I often find that the size of sweater I'm making, which is usually a 2x, sometimes a 3x, often ends up with a really wide or large neck opening, larger than I want it to be. And that's true across the board for any pattern I'm working on. It's not specific to this designer. So lately I've been skipping the initial collar instructions and instead casting on the amount of stitches I need for the body and working down from that point. At the end of the sweater, I'll pick those stitches back up and I'll knit the collar so it can come in just how I like it. So that's what I'm doing with this sweater here. I started by crocheting a chain and I'm picking stitches up into that chain for my provisional cast on. In hindsight, I would have cast on directly to a stitch saver or a barber cord, the little thin tube of silicone, so that at the end of the sweater, I could just slide those stitches straight onto a needle. It would have saved me a lot of time, but that's okay. Hindsight is 20/20. I think I'll do that moving forward. So this is my really peaceful start to the sweater. In just a second, I'm going to give you a moment to listen to the bird song that I got to enjoy on this beautiful morning in Tucson, Arizona. And now heading back to my reality in Ohio, where it is winter again. So I'm knitting a little bit of the body of the sweater here with my kitten Scout in the background. I'm using Scout from Kelborn Woolens for this sweater, and Scout, our kitten, is actually named after the yarn. He wasn't named Scout because we're obsessed with the yarn or anything. We just thought it was a cute name, and we often have yarn on the mind in our household. So some of you ask how fast I knit, if the knitting speed in my intro video is my actual speed, and no, it is not. The speed you're seeing here is my natural speed, my sort of medium pace. Sometimes I'll knit a little faster if I'm in a hurry, but this is my usual speed. I like to enjoy, kind of meditate as I knit, so it's not a race, and I wish I could knit at super speed, but alas, I can't. So this clip is at Squires Castle in northeastern Ohio. It was a really beautiful day, sort of a surprise break from our winter in Cleveland. So I was able to sit in the sun for a little bit and work on the body of the sweater. Now that I'm editing this video, it is snowing again. So the one good thing about it being winter still is that I'll be able to wear this sweater by the time it's done and enjoy it a few times before packing it up until next season. Next, we're going to fast forward to the finishing process for a sweater. Some of you have asked about blocking, and I have a total blocking video coming in the next few weeks, but today we're going to look at how I finish a sweater and make sure that I like the fit, finish, and I'm happy with the project. I've got the sweater finished. I've completed knitting all of it. So you can see here I've got the pattern of the yoke, the body, the ribbing, sleeve 1, and sleeve 2, and then my ribbing at the collar is all complete as well. So I'm going to show you up close a couple things on the sweater that I'm hoping will shift during the blocking process. So this is the back side. You can see my longer depth where I have short rows to build up the height of the neck. And then on the front side, the pattern starts much closer to the collar. So we're on the back of the sweater. Let me zoom in. And I'm going to point out some puckering. Looking at these areas, I'm hoping you can see a little bit of puckering. If I turn it on its side, again, this is the puckering I'm talking about. Now, color work can often result in puckering if the tension of the floats, the carries on the back side of the yarn, the wrong side of the fabric, are too tight. But I don't have any tension issues here in the pattern. It's just between sections, and I'll show you on the inside. Those are the sections where I'm using the ladder back jacquard technique. All right, so on the inside, my floats are in this section. You can see where I'm switching back and forth between the two colors. Some of the floats are longer. There's a long float. Some of these are very short before I use the color again. And then in portions where I needed to work several stitches before reusing the second color, I chose to insert ladder back stitches. So this technique, it's like a moment of double knitting where you're sending a stitch to the back side of your work and it sits separated from the front layer of fabric. So if I lift this spine, you can see the spine runs all the way through most of my pattern. I can lift that spine off of the front fabric and they actually separate. So I'm a little concerned that my ladder back carries, or ladder backs in place of carries, might be a little too tight. Maybe I didn't leave enough slack with these ladder backs. So we will find out. We'll find out very soon when this finishes blocking. So my hope is that with the wet block, by actually soaking this piece in a solution of water and wool wash, then laying it flat, letting it dry to the dimensions I need, hopefully will smooth out that pucker on the front. But we'll see. Besides the puckering, I think I'm really happy with my tension. I think that a wet block will help make the pattern look even more smooth, especially places where I just have a singular column of stitches and these individual floating stitches. Besides smoothing out those ladder back puckers, I'm hoping that the blocking will give me slightly more length, and I'll cut to a clip in a minute of me wearing the sweater pre-blocked. I'm hoping for a little bit more length, maybe 2 inches, maybe 3 inches from the body. And for the sleeves, I think I tapered them a little too quickly. I love the look of the taper, but on my arms it's a little snug through the middle part of my arm. So I think when I block it, I will most likely block it wider than it needs to be. I might add some pins along that section just to give me a slightly more roomy sleeve. All right, I think that's everything I want to show pre-block. The last thing the wet block will do is help me even out some of my stitches. This stockinette portion in one color is already fairly even, but to my eye, I notice spots where stitches are slightly tighter or looser because I'm picking up this sweater whenever I have a chance. I'm knitting it in the car, I'm knitting it on a break at work, I'm knitting it at a concert, all sorts of things. And so sometimes when I pick up the sweater to knit, I might be stressed. I might have something else distracting me, so my stitches might be a little off from my usual tension. I try to sit down, focus on what I'm doing, but I like to knit in all the little gaps of time in my schedule. So sometimes that ends up with a little bit of variety in my tension. You can also see the collar is a little squirrely. Those puckers exist between each repeat of the motif. I'm pretty happy with the body, but I think it'll get even more smooth. And I'm hoping for just a little more space on the sleeves. Okay, here I am in the pre-blocked sweater. You can see my head here, but now I'm going to stand up, cut my head off. So I'm pretty happy with the fit. I'm going to gain some width. All I wanted to say was I'm going to gain some weight. I might gain weight. Anyway, I'm going to gain width when I block because I'm going to lay the sweater out after it's soaked, and automatically I'm going to get a little more space, a little more bloom from my stitches. So I know I'm going to gain a little bit of width, so I never like to make my sweaters too loose to begin with, because I want it to fit with an appropriate amount of ease. I don't want it to be terribly oversized. I'll gain a little bit of length, but I don't want to have to manipulate the sweater too much. I'll show some of this when I'm blocking it. I'm really happy with the yoke. Even putting it on, some of those gathers from the ladder backs have smoothed. So I'm crossing my fingers that those will smooth out all the way with blocking. And then you can see the sleeves. They're really snug. So I'm hoping that I can get a little bit of space on the sleeve. And if I can't, I've got the tail still out. So if I have to, I can pull back a portion of the sleeve and decrease less. So that's the sweater pre-blocked. We'll take another look at it once it's blocked, and hopefully there will be a noticeable difference. All right, I'll see you in the next clip. All right, my next step is to wet block the sweater. I like to wet block things when I'm blocking for the first time because I really feel like letting the wool sit in a bath of water helps the stitches relax, it helps them bloom, it helps the fiber fill back to its natural state before it was sitting wound tightly in a ball and then manipulated on your needles. So I like to let it soak, and I hear a cat outside the door. Before I fill the basin, I'm going to add just a little bit of soak. I'm going to add it first so that as I pour in the water, it will help agitate a little bit of this and get things distributed and a little bubbly. So I'm just adding a single squeeze. It's probably a teaspoon. I don't need much of this at all, and that's also going to help me preserve the bottle. All right, I'm back with my filled basin. One thing I like about this basin is that it's really flexible, so I can squeeze it under a bathroom sink and fill it up pretty easily. I don't want to have to walk up and down stairs in my house, and I don't necessarily want to fill gallons or pitchers of water. So I have my filled basin filled about 3/4 of the way full. I want plenty of water to cover my sweater and submerge it. And you can see the bubbles from the tiny amount, the teaspoon of wool wash that I added. So I'm ready to throw in my sweater. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, I have some tails that are not yet woven in. I like to weave things in as I go, but I'm going to leave the tail at the hem and the tail at the wrists of the sleeves out in case I want to add length or redo the sleeves once I blocked it. It's much harder to go in and pick out your buried end, so I leave those out until I'm sure that I like the dimensions. Okay, into the wash it goes. I'm just putting mine in folded up, and I'm going to submerge. At this point, I want to make sure that I've submerged my garment all the way. I'll take a few minutes just to put light pressure on it, making sure that all of the fiber is saturated. If I just drop it in the water, parts of it may not actually saturate. They'll resist a little bit of the water, and they might sit floating at the top like this. If I can, I want to make sure that every bit of this is submerged, sitting at the bottom of the basin before I leave it to soak. I'm trying to see if we have any color transfer immediately. It's hard to tell. The water still looks pretty clear, but after this sits and we come to press the water out, we'll be able to tell if any of the dye has leached out. So pressing, 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 and at this point, I'm going to make sure to drop my color catcher in, and I'll submerge that as well. Again, the idea of this color catcher is that if there's excess dye that makes its way into the water, the color catcher will absorb it and keep it from staining or tinting other portions of the sweater. I think I could afford to have a little more water in here just to keep things covered. The sweater, I think, is sitting at the bottom of the basin, but it's a large sweater. There's quite a bit of fabric, so I'm going to grab a little bit more water to make sure everything is totally submerged. Bear with. Okay, I'm happier with how submerged that is. And you can see that all of the sweater is sitting below the waterline. The water definitely looks a little murky to me. It looks a little gray, a little purpley. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have some color coming out of the garment, some over dye, which is really common. And then the next step is to leave this to soak. I'm going to leave this to soak for 30 minutes just because I'm a little concerned about the color transfer. So in 30 minutes, I'll come back and I'll show you the next steps. Okay, our sweater has sat in the solution for about 30 minutes, and I'm not really noticing anything on the color catcher, which hopefully means we didn't really have bleed. The water is a little murky, a little gray, but it doesn't appear that we have anything that's transferred to my contrast color. So that is great, but just in case, we had the color catcher in for an emergency situation. If we had had color bleed, then that color catcher would have been a lifesaver. All right, my next step is to drain out the water. So I'm just going to take this next door to our bathroom, pour the excess water out, and then I will come back to show you how I press more water out of the garment. Okay, excess water drained off. I noticed the color catcher in the lighting in the bathroom no longer looked totally white. Can you see when I lay it against my white desk, the color catcher almost looks a little bit gray, a little purple. So I think it did help absorb some of the excess dye. Now that I have the water poured out, I will show you how I press out a little bit more of the water. At this point, our sweater is really heavy. You can see as I hold it, it's dripping with water. So the first thing I'm going to do is always make sure I'm supporting the sweater. I don't want to pick it up from one end and let the whole garment stretch out. It's so heavy at this point. I think of it a little bit like hair. When you're washing your hair, when your hair is wet, it's its most fragile. So you don't get out of the shower with wet hair and force a brush through it. Instead, you detangle, you use a wide tooth comb, and then you get your way there. So similarly, we want to make sure that our knit or crocheted items are supported and gathered. We're not pulling and distorting them any more than they have to be. So lifting the sweater in one bundle, I'll just take my hands and I'll press inwards. And as I do that, we're getting a lot of water. So I'm just turning the sweater different angles and pressing in. Squeezing with my hands, trying to get as much water out as possible. We never want to wring the sweater out like you would with a washcloth or a towel. We want to make sure that we're respecting the orientation of the stitches. So we're just gathering the garment, kind of folding it up on itself and pressing water out. If we tried to lay the sweater out to dry at this point, I don't know if it would ever dry. It would take a long time. There's just too much moisture trapped in. So this pressing out of the water is like when the washing machine spins at the end of a wash cycle, and it spins out as much of that water as possible before things go to dry. So all of my pressing so far has been in the first arrangement where I picked up the sweater, and we're still getting quite a bit out. You can see how much water we've gathered so far. And you can see how dark the water is. When it pools there in the corner, it's definitely no longer clear. Now I'm folding the sweater into a slightly different configuration, and I'll press out a little bit more water. At this point, I think we have as much water out from the pressing as possible, so we move to our next step. Our next step is to roll up whatever we are blocking in some sort of towel so that we can press out even more moisture. For this, I'm using a blocking towel from Coco Knits. It's got the label somewhere on it. It's just a large microfiber towel, or not microfiber. This is just a large towel, kind of like a ShamWow, and it's super absorbent. But again, you can use any sort of towels you have on hand. I would urge you to use towels that you're willing to part with or you're willing to dedicate specifically to blocking, because with the excess dye, you'll probably absorb some of that color into your towel. So don't use your nicest towels, don't use your pure white towels if you're not willing to sacrifice them for blocking towels. I just lay my sweater out, spreading it out as much as I can onto the surface of this blocking towel, trying to get an even layer. At this point, the sweater doesn't need to be smooth. I just want the layer of fabric to be somewhat even before I roll it up. Now, this isn't ideal to show you on my small table. Normally, I would lay this out across a kitchen island or a bed with my blocking mats spread across. So all I'm doing is rolling this up, sort of like a burrito or a cinnamon roll. Now I have my wet sweater inside my folded or rolled up towel. The next step is to apply pressure to this towel. As we apply pressure, we will hopefully get even more water pressed out of the sweater. We can fold the towel in half, put pressure on it, and if your garment is really wet, if you had trouble pressing water out initially, you can roll it up in a towel, apply your pressure, unroll it. If it's still really, really wet, put it in another towel, dry towel, do the same process again. So now I'll show you, I'm going to move to a different camera, and I'll show you my favorite way to press the water out of these towels. Please don't mind the dirty floors. My favorite way to press more water out is to step on the towel. This is another reason it's nice to have a blocking specific towel if you don't want to stomp on your nice bath towels. You can see from my footsteps all of the water that's already coming out. So I just tread back and forth a couple of times. And it's amazing how much water this releases. As I mentioned, at this point we could rewrap the towel or rewrap the sweater with the towel. My towel is pretty wet, so I think I'm going to move on to laying out the sweater and pinning it and letting it dry naturally the rest of the way. To help me lay out the sweater and pin it to the dimensions I'd like, I'll be using a set of knit blockers from the company Knitter's Pride. These are combs with a series of pins attached. The pins are fairly sharp, so you have to be careful when you're using them. It comes with several wide combs and then smaller combs. And you'll see when I'm blocking the sweater, when I'm pinning it out, these are a great time saver instead of going in with individual T-pins. So this is what I'll be using in conjunction with my blocking mats. All right, I like to lay my sweaters out with the front side facing me, just because I think more people will be looking at my sweater from the front. So I want to make sure that that portion of it is aligned and blocked the way I like. So again, I don't want to stretch out my sweater too much. Instead, I want to cradle it when I can and lay it out as close as possible to its natural state. So I'll start by gathering the neckline, just bringing that in so that things don't end up too stretched. Then I'll slide this up just to make sure I have room on the board. I'll gently spread the shoulders. Oh. And this requires a lot of leaning and it's not glamorous. So I, at this point, will arrange the sweater, trying to get it as flat and smooth. I want to get rid of those puckers if I can. And then I'll make sure that the width of the sweater reaches the intended width that I'd like. I don't want it to be too much smaller or too much bigger. And then one of my goals was to get the sleeves a little bit wider. So I'm going to start pinning and arranging, and I'll check in with you in a few minutes. After quite a bit of rearranging and fiddling with the sweater, I think I'm happy with how smooth I've laid it out and sort of the evenness of the angles. I want to make sure the hem across the bottom is a straight line, and I of course wanted to make sure those puckers are smoothed out. All right, at this point I leave the sweater to dry. I'm going to put a box fan on in the room just so there's a little bit of circulation. If you have a ceiling fan, or if it's a room where you can leave a window open if the weather's nice, or a door open for cross ventilation, then that's great. We have to keep our door shut because we want to keep the cats away from things as they're blocking. So in this situation, I like to keep some sort of fan on just for some circulation. Here's the sweater about 12 hours into the drying process. You can see the spots of the hem between the combs are pulling back up. If you're ever aggressively blocking something and really trying to get a larger finished size than the size when you finished knitting or crocheting, you'll see that as it dries, it will pull back in. So if needed, you can repin at this point. Also, if your garment is still really, really wet, you could flip it. You could rotate it to make sure the other side gets some circulation. But in this case, with the fan on, my sweater is almost dry, so I think I can leave it as is for another 12 hours. All right, here's the sweater blocked. I'm super happy with the ladder back portions. They're totally flat now. And if I show this clip side by side with the pre-blocking, hopefully you can tell that now I've got a little more room. I've got a little more length. Overall, the sweater fits and lays much nicer than it did pre-block. So that's that. The sleeves are still a little snug, so I think that I'll probably end up pulling the sleeves back a portion, making them a little shorter. I don't think I need quite that much length on the sleeve. So that's that. I might go in, taper the sleeves slightly differently, but this is the gist of the blocked sweater. I've got the length, I've got the room, and the pattern looks so much more even. So we'll take a look at this under the camera as well. Here's a close-up look of the sweater post-wet block. Hopefully you can see a difference of how smooth the color work is, how defined the stitches are at this point. If I pull up the stockinette portion, this as well looks pretty smooth to my eye. The stitch definition, the evenness of the stitches, it's much nicer here post-block than when I just finished the sweater, when it's fresh off the needles. But it makes a huge difference with the color work portion. Hopefully, if we're looking at this right after looking at a clip of it pre-blocked, you can see the difference. The ladder back portions that previously buckled are now totally flat. So that's good to know. I was really worried that my ladder backs were carried too tightly. You can see them on the back here. It's that spine. And with the blocking, it's just made the fabric completely flat. I always try to leave plenty of space with my floats when I'm doing color work so that after blocking and when wearing, the stitches can stretch, the fabric can stretch as much as it needs to without putting any extra stress on the color work. So I think I like the tension I'm using. About a year ago, a lot of my color work was still pretty uneven, and so I tried to make a conscious effort to have even more generous floats, which sometimes feels crazy, like your work is just too loose, but for a lot of stranded color work, it evens out once you finish the object and once you block it. So I'm really happy with this. This is the front side. Let me flip it over to the back. There's that. Totally smooth all the way around. And as I mentioned when I had it on, the sleeves are still a little too snug for my liking. I adjusted the decreases, so that was something I chose to do. It wasn't something prescribed by the pattern. So I might pull back about 10, 12 inches and let the sleeve continue without so many decreases. But I think I'm going to jump in and wear this sweater a few times. It's still really cold in Ohio. We're in March, but we still have snow happening every other day. So I think I'm going to wear this sweater a little bit just to enjoy it, and then I'll make the final call about redoing a portion of the sleeves or leaving them as is. Sometimes when I wear a sweater, I feel like the sleeves automatically grow and give me a little more space just from being pushed up on my arms. So we'll see what happens, but I may go in and spend a few hours just redoing the last portion of the sleeves. So for that, I think I will loosely bury my tail. I'm not going to bury it all the way and snip. I think I'll just send it down into the sleeve so that I could pull it back out if I decide to redo a portion. Otherwise, I am thrilled with this sweater. I am so excited to be able to wear it. I love the colors. I think the navy with the light gray has a sort of nautical look to it. It's great contrast. I think it could go with a lot of different things. Part of me wanted to make sort of wacky color combination, but typically I end up with more modest knits. What I'm wearing now is one of the wackiest things I own, so to each their own. I think the sweater really works with bold choices. If you do strong grounded neutral as your background color, you could go with a variegated contrast, you could go with a neon colored contrast. I've seen a lot of really cool examples of this sweater on people out in the wild and also through Ravelry projects. So that's that. That's almost that. After filming everything, I realized that so many stranded colorwork knitters love to see the wrong side. So here is a longer shot of the wrong side, the inside of my sweater, where you can see all of my floats, you can see my ladder back columns, and just take a minute to enjoy seeing the wrong side, the reverse of the fabric. If you've made it this far, thanks for being here with me. Thanks for watching my videos. If you are a stranded colorwork knitter, I'd love to hear some of your favorite stranded patterns in the comments. I've only done maybe 4 stranded projects so far, and I really enjoy it. I think I'm learning with each project and getting a better hold on my tension each time, and so I like to peruse patterns. I like to daydream about what I'll make next. But if you are a stranded lover, and especially someone who's experienced with stranded knitting, please let me know your favorite patterns, and I'd love to add them to my favorites. Again, this pattern is from Caitlin Hunter, and 10 out of 10 would recommend the pattern, would recommend her as a designer. I've loved everything I've done from her so far, and I used Kelborn Woolen's Scout for this sweater, and so far, very happy with the results. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. I'm always really excited to chronicle the progress of a project and share it with people. So I hope you enjoyed certain aspects of the video. Maybe you enjoyed the project itself. Maybe it's something you've already made or you might want to make in the future. Let me know in the comments. I love to hear what you have to say. It makes me feel a lot more normal talking to a camera when I eventually get to hear your side of things. So thanks for joining me here. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, happy crafting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.